Welcome everyone, thank you for coming. I'm Crystal Warren, I'm the manager of the curatorial section from Amazwi, South African Museum of Literature. And as you will have gathered, our director is currently stuck in Bedford. She would have been here and will hopefully be here at some point. So between COVID and protests, the show will go on. Also, a bit of apology, I was going to do a walkthrough of a virtual exhibition, but I thought there'd be Wi-Fi, so I will just, you can get the link and when you get home you can all look at it. I'll just talk a bit about it. So we will. All right, so I'm talking about a major exhibition that Amazwi has got on called Scenes from the South. It's the life and works of J.M. Coetzee. And for anyone who doesn't know who J.M. Coetzee is, he's probably South Africa's greatest living writer. He's won the Nobel Prize, the Booker Prize. He was the first person ever to win it twice. He's won pretty much every award that is out there. So he's a hugely important, hugely significant writer. And I would encourage you, any of you who are in Makanda, to pop into the museum and see the exhibition. So this is talking a bit about the exhibition, but also we were asked to say, well, how did we get J.M. Coetzee to celebrate his 80th birthday in Grahamstown, Makanda, with us? So this is partly that story as well. And hopefully some of the images will tempt you to go and look at the exhibition. Because this is also the first time that many of these items have been on display to the public. So how did this all come about? A few years ago, David Atwell, who's a South African academic but based at the University of York, was in then Grahamstown doing some research. And we were having a conversation about how could the University of York and NELM collaborate in some way? Well, the obvious thing is J.M. Coetzee. So we're like, yes, we must do some sort of project to do with this, because David Atwell is one of the world's leading Coetzee scholars. And then we got busy with our new building and got a bit distracted. And once we'd settled into the building, we were then thinking, well, we've got this brand new building. We need to have a very special exhibition. And so we picked up the conversation with David again and just thought, let's do an exhibition on J.M. Coetzee. And we worked out that we said, you know, in 2020, he's going to be turning 80. So let's aim for that. And David warned us as well, said, to get this sort of exhibition together, you're looking at 2 years. So we started the planning a long time ago. And part of the challenge is we have a lot of material in our museum, but the bulk of his archive is at the University of Austin, Texas. So it meant we had to start thinking about, well, let's think really big. Our director says this, and then I have the grey hairs to show for it. Let's see if we can do an exhibition using the material that's in Texas. So it was a long period of email discussions, getting in touch with various people, and somewhere along the line as well, we discovered that another Coetzee scholar was also looking at doing some sort of an exhibition, and they were both based in England. So the two of them got together and said, well, rather than we do one and you do one and then there's one here, let's make one. So it started to become a project, not just an Amazwi museum. So in the end it became Amazwi, the Harry Ransom Center in Texas, the University of York, and SOAS at the University of London, which is the School of Oriental and African Studies. So it was a very collaborative project. And when we get a bit closer, collaborative projects are nice to do. They're better if everyone can be in the same country. So we were sitting, as the exhibition was being put together, with the collection in America and in Grahamstown, the curators in York and London, the designers in East London, and we were sitting in Makanda. It was a bit chaotic. So in 2018, negotiations was happening. We were starting to get, now I'm going to see if I can drive this machine. There we go. So Beverly Thomas, the director, and myself, we flew to Texas. We stopped off in London to meet with David and Kai. And then, actually David then flew to Texas as well. So we spent 4 very hectic and very hot days in Texas. It made me stop complaining about the heat in Grahamstown. All right, and the reason there is the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Austin, Texas, which is easily the world's biggest and most significant literary archive. So they have huge collections. They are massive. This is just the doorway. It's this, I mean, the building is terrible. It's a great big concrete block. But inside it was amazing. And we had 2 main sort of aims of our visit. The one was so that we could get a sense of what was in the collection. We knew broadly, but to be able to see what will be interesting, not as literary scholars, but as museum people, because what will be interesting for an exhibition, how can we get developing a story around it? So we needed to do that. We also needed to let them meet us and to meet with the director, the registrar, because you can imagine, I mean, we would be, if you're sitting in America, you're the world's leading literary archive, and you get this request from somewhere in Africa saying, you know, we want to borrow one of your major collections. So they were understandably a little nervous or a little unsure, but so we were able to meet with them, talk to them. They could see that we actually knew what we were doing. And so I think had we not gone to Texas physically, it might never have happened. Or they would have been much more restrictive. So it also moved over that course from we want to borrow your material to we want to work together on an exhibition. So the plan is that after the exhibition has been on display here, so COVID kind of scuppered all this, but so when it is safe to set foot in America, the whole exhibition is going to then be installed at their archive for 6 months. So it's then became a much more partnership, which was quite helpful for us as well, because they charge normally something like $100 per item for a loan. So, but because it was then a partnership, those fees fell away. I mean, it still cost us a small fortune to get the material here, but you'll see a bit of that. So here's another view of, they have these beautiful stained sort of etched glass with authors' faces and signatures. And this is just a view of the reading room where we spent 3 hectic days just going through piles of material, and it's like, and a lot of, oh, look at this is so cool, and a lot of it was making this stuff. If nothing else goes in, this has to go in. And this was, you see, there's this kind of, everything would come carefully noted, what you'd asked for, and this was one of the ones that I said, I don't care how it fits in, we need this book. If you'll see it later, we got this one. This is a prize that J.M. Coetzee got when he was 7 for writing an essay on what I did on my school holidays, or my summer holiday. So at 7, he was already winning prizes for his writing. And the archive there is quite interesting because Coetzee's mother kept a diary where she kept everything. So in there are photo albums, there are diaries of John, you know, as this child, his first words. It's this amazing little detail, sometimes just little snippets, you know, John did this and John did that. There are his school books, so there's all sorts of really interesting things you don't normally see. So it was a hectic, and then just while we're talking, you can just see in the corner there Beverly and David Atwell next to a George Washington statue. And this was at the time when America was having their issue around statues. So the photo on the right was, I can't remember who it was, someone offensive. So there you can see the statue has been removed and the plaque had been taped up in tape. So it was quite interesting to see they were dealing with similar things to us. Okay. All right. So then we'll fast forward. I should have left that one up. So then everyone was happy. We then went through a long process of David and Kai working on the content. They visited Amazui to look at our collection to decide what items were going in. We had work going around the designing of the exhibition, how we were going to arrange it, and because this was such a large exhibition, we needed extra cases made. And my main thing was around getting these, we've now agreed on the loan and we now need to get the material from Texas to South Africa. And to give you an idea of the hoops we jumped through, we had to fill in a form about the building, which was 30 pages, down to what sort of concrete have you got in the floor, how far is the fire station away, humidity, temperature, the size of the rooms. It was very detailed. I learned an awful lot about our building that I didn't actually know. So it was a long process, yes, sorting out insurance, because obviously you don't just, put a Nobel Prize winner's manuscripts in the post. So it was months of negotiation, sorting things out, while simultaneously designing the exhibition and planning all the birthday events, the opening of it, because in between, I've jumped a step, sorry. We had also met with Coetzee quite early in the process to say, we want to do this exhibition, are you okay with it? And he was quite happy. And then we sort of said, okay, and would you consider coming for the opening? And he was quite surprised that we would ask him. And, his big concern was, well, this is like 2 years away. What if I die before then? It's like, we'll make a plan about that, it's fine. So he agreed, and we also then were talking to him about what he was comfortable doing. So that it's like, okay, we will not make you, shake hands with every dignitary in Grahamstown. We'll work with, as with people in Craddock will know when he was here last year unexpectedly, he's very private, so you respect that. So it was a big help having him on board as well, because then we found that friends of his were then coming through and saying, I've got this material that you might find interesting. So his publisher of his books in Latin America produced this beautiful video that we were able to use of how his books are received there. So there was a whole network of things that was just escalating. But then, yes, the material arrived, and it felt a bit like being in a James Bond or some sort of spy thing. So I had to fly up to Johannesburg to meet, because also this sort of material never travels alone. It travels with someone from the centre. So he flew out, and I had to meet him at the airport. So it was like flying to an airport, meeting a total stranger, exchanging packages. So there you can see behind the case was that great big case. And I looked at this and I thought, oh my goodness, how are they going to get this into the truck? It does not look that big. But this was the packing. When they then took it down, it was actually 2 boxes. So there it was being loaded into, very early on a Friday morning, loaded into this vehicle. Ken, our friend from America, got into the vehicle and travelled with it. I then got back on the plane, flew back to Grahamstown, or to Port Elizabeth to Grahamstown, so that I could be there when it arrived and deal with the last minute preparation. So they left about 8 in the morning, and they got to Grahamstown at 10 o'clock that night. So again, it's like, okay, now we have to go to work at 10 o'clock because this is all arriving. Which meant he got to see a bit of South Africa as well, so they got to drive down. So it's a huge. And so those were the 2 boxes that arrived in the end. And so then what we had to do was leave them for the weekend to acclimatize, because they've now been in this secure box. And one of the issues with paper projects, people might not realize, is paper is very fragile. Particularly, it doesn't like changes in heat or humidity. So this is why that was all the special packing, so that you kind of gradually adjust it, because, you know, it had gone from, fortunately, you know, Texas is quite hot, and it arrived here in summer where it was quite hot, so it didn't have too many fluctuations. And then we started opening, and the packaging is quite extraordinary. You can see it was specially packed for each. You can see all the foam around the edge. So that is thick foam, so that the layers, each layer had foam between it. It was extraordinary how carefully it was done. And so when we came to the opening, of course, all the curatorial staff were there. It's like, we want to see this too. So with great excitement, and they're starting to open the boxes. So we unpacked them, started unpacking. And there you can see each piece of paper is in its own little folder, in its own place. And what he is holding in the photo on the right is this very detailed book. So it wasn't a case of we just unpack it. We had to go through every piece of paper, note that it had arrived, this was the condition it arrived in, and we would both sign. And so when it returns, we'll repeat the process, so that if there's a problem, it's like, well, this is how it got here. We didn't tear this piece of paper. And here you can see the level of detail. So this was a scrapbook of reviews and clippings, and they have marked each of those red things. So there's a slight crease here, or there's a tear here, there's a coffee mark here. It took us probably 3 days to unpack, because we were checking so carefully. Then we had to start preparing the items for display, because there Ken was showing us where there are notebooks. They were also open on a separate page, so they open in this there's little cradles to hold it open. And there's a way of taping them so they stay open, so the page doesn't flip. So he wanted us to know, in case anything came loose, we would know how to do it. And at the same time, our staff were busy preparing our material. So you can see them, the 2 on the right, working, putting our documents in. And we've used a slightly different way as well. So in the exhibition, it's easy to see, right, this is from Austin, Texas, this is from Amaswi. But again, it was a lot of work going into that. And in between, we were working on an exhibition catalogue, which if anyone wants to see more of it, there are some in the bookshop, which has there's more pictures and a bit of detail. So here you can see our little train arrived. I don't know if you can actually read that. So the juniors, what I did in the holidays competition. So that was his. And a minor piece of information, despite the name that's used, this book was apparently co-written with Graham Greene. So it was an added point of interest. All right, and so here, of course, was the most exciting of the objects for many of us. So this is the Nobel Prize certificate, which was absolutely beautiful. The illustration, it doesn't really look, it's actually a sand art. So we had great fun exploring all these things. So it wasn't just piece of paper, there also were objects. Including, so some of the notebooks, there's some of Kutsio's school notebooks. There's his English lessons where he's writing essays. There's some of his geography books, and there's his maps of, America being drawn. So there was a lot of really interesting. Then we also needed to prepare the display room, and again, very particular in terms of the care. So what Ken is doing there, he's measuring the light levels in the display cases to make sure that there's not, because too much light can make the paper degrade and it can make the ink fade. And something I discovered is red ink is the worst in terms of fading. And of course, how do writers generally edit their work? With red ink. So they're particularly concerned about the red ink. But the light levels were okay. And what we do as well, when there's no one in the exhibition area, it's kept in darkness. So when someone comes in to look, we'll turn on the lights. So you keep it as dark as possible. And there's, oh look, there's Marika. We were busy setting up, getting the display cases together. So it really was all hands on deck for several months. More working on the display cases. And I mentioned the books. So here you can see one of the little cases that were made. And these were custom made for each of the notebooks. And what you can see there is for all of his novels, Coetzee would keep a notebook where he would make ideas, thoughts that he'd had. So that's really interesting to look at them with the manuscript. And so next to it you can see, I think this was The Life and Times of Michael Kay. No, this is photo. I'm losing it. So you can see there's a draft of his earlier on working on that novel. Okay, getting the and here we have, these are the two, so that's Kai Easton and David Atwell. So they came down to help with the final setting up and deciding which item goes into which case. And there you can see the director, the Maswi, also getting together the final images coming out. Because again, you don't just want to put the manuscripts out. There needs to be a story, something to make it interesting, to follow the script, to have lots of additional photographs, and so on. Okay, and then came the great day, and we finally, after, again, I think we were all going a little bit hysterical by that stage. So we opened the event on his birthday. And of course, the challenge we had is that Amalsui is big, but it's not unlimited. So we had to make it an invitation-only event, because we knew if we said J.M. Coetzee's in Grahamstown, we'd have had hundreds of people. I mean, as it was, we had hundreds of people. So it was quite a mission as well, working out the invitation lists and making sure, because of course, this was his 80th birthday. He had friends who wanted to come, and then we started hearing, oh, you know, Zoe Wickham wants to come to this. So she was going to fly from England to be at this event. And we're like, okay, you know, and then this writer is like, I really want to be at this. So people came from around the world. So there were a few photos of the, to give you some idea. So this was our opening event, just some of the people milling around. So with much excitement. And there were speeches. So for those who don't know, that is J.M. Coetzee, and his partner on his left is Dorothy Driver. And they were both here last year at the Shriner Festival. And on his right is the High Commissioner for Australia, because for those who don't know, Coetzee lives in Australia now. So she was here as well. And there were several speeches and so on. And then as part of the celebration, we had named our reading room the J.M. Coetzee Reading Room. So this was the official opening of that as well. The reason for doing that was largely because we get more queries on J.M. Coetzee than any other writer, possibly all the other writers together. So there's a huge amount of critical interest, so it seemed inappropriate. And to have him there for the opening was just wonderful. And then the daunting thing when you do an exhibition on an author and then you have the author there to look at the exhibition. So I think we were all like, please let him like it. And it was quite intriguing. He said that there were things there that he had completely forgotten about. So he learned things that it's like, oh, you know, I forgot about that thing. So that was, but he seemed to like it, so that was a huge relief. But here you can see how some of the ways there we have the little train book, and in front of it there's a scrapbook which had his drawings as a child, and there are these drawings of trains and rockets, and there were his school reports. Needless to say, he did very well at school. Wasn't so good on, I meant to check, I think it was accountancy or something. There was one he didn't get an A for it, but he did particularly well at English and Afrikaans. And according to all the reports, he was a model scholar. And anyone who has read his autobiographical book, Boyhood, will know he talks about how if he didn't get an A, if he didn't come first in class, he didn't know how he would live with the shame. And this was clearly an accurate representation. But so you can see as well, so we had things on the wall, and the approach that was being taken for the exhibition, which is hence the scenes of the South, was looking at the links that he'd had between the South in South Africa, Texas as the South of America, and then he's now living in Australia, and there's a strong South American connection. And they realized that Adelaide, South Africa, and I think it's Argentina where he's particularly strong, are all on the same, I think, 34 degrees latitude. So there's this kind of southern theme. So they were looking at how that came through in his writing and in his life. And so you're able to see photographs of the house where he grew up, his time at Cape Town as a lecturer, all of that. But then, you know, you don't get J.M. Coetzee to come all the way from Adelaide to Grahamstown and just, you know, have a ceremony and then send him on his way. So we made a big celebration, and so the following day we had a writer's day. So there were, again, we had writers from around the world who came, and some were doing readings and some were having discussion groups. So here we have Sipiwe Mahala and Ella Kabuma. They were in a panel discussion on writing back, because Ella Kabuma has written back, her latest collection writes back to a lot of authors, including Coetzee. And Sipiwe Mahala has just got a collection out of stories out as well, writing back to a lot of South African writers. And we also had Michiel Haynes and Ntikeng Mohatli. So there were a whole lot of writers discussing that. There were we had a session of poets there, who then read some of their poetry. And Zoe Wickham and Alan Vladislavich, Ankie Krok all read from their work. So it was, and we were hugely impressed. We thought Coetzee might stay for a bit and then go off to have a bit of a rest, but he was there the whole day, interacting with everyone, and so it was quite a special occasion. And in the evening, it culminated. We had a musical interlude, because, you know, it's like, how do we give a bit of a party to Coetzee? So we had local musicians, students, people from some of the schools doing music, and then he did a reading. So he read from his latest book, The Death of Jesus, and it was absolutely amazing. It was very extraordinary and very moving. Okay, and then, as I said, this was the point I was going to show you around, but if you go to the National Arts Festival website, you can find, because of course, so the plan was we would open this exhibition in February. It would run through until after the Arts Festival in July. And then in July we would take it down and we would return the trip. Everything would go to Texas and they would have it on display for 6 months. And even at the opening, we were starting, there were a few people who were meant to be coming from China, and they couldn't come because travel had been banned. And then in March, everything shut down. So when we closed for lockdown, we also carefully took the whole exhibition down because let's move it to a more secure environment. And we realized, okay, this is not going to be 3 weeks. And of course, festival was going to bring in a lot of people. So we were sitting thinking, we've got this huge exhibition. We've spent probably 3 years, I don't want to think how much money, and no one's going to see it. It's like, And then the festival decided that they were going to go online for a lot of things. So we then had this frantic rush to put the exhibition in a virtual format. So it's quite interesting. It's a 3D filming, so you can actually walk around and see, look at the wall, and you can click on it to see what it says. So this went up on the festival website, and it was going to just be for the duration of the festival. I'm like, well, okay, at least people can see. But they have kept all the exhibitions that they did like that, so they are still up there. So the one small advantage of this whole year is it's meant people who weren't able to come to Makana can actually see the exhibition. It's not the same as seeing it in person. And then fortunately, the Texas people contacted us as well and said, you know, what are we going to do about this? Because they were in a similar situation. They had just opened an exhibition on, I think, Gabriel Marquez. And they were also shut in. So we agreed we'd wait until, in their words, this is all over. So the exhibition is staying with us until it is safe for it to travel again, which I suspect is not going to be for a while. So, yes.
Just tell them about the gaming possibility. You said about your nephew found out.
Yes. Oh, yes. So yes, and this is what happens when you have slightly older people doing this. You know, I thought we were just going to have slides of everything, and then they came with this wonderful 3D thing. And I had a very excited phone call from my sister-in-law to say my nephew, who had just before his birthday, just before lockdown, had got one of these virtual reality headsets that and I discovered this worked on this, so he could actually physically walk through and look at things, which is just mind-boggling. You know, he could actually walk around, whereas here you have to kind of negotiate. If you're a gamer, it's probably easier. I kept finding myself staring at the roof or the floor or getting a bit... But it really is an interesting way. So I would encourage you to go to the Arts Festival website, have a look, and definitely come to Grahamstown, to see, because this is the thing, this material has been, particularly the American material, has not been seen before. They had, you know, they haven't had it that long. They'd only just finished processing it. So this was its first public appearance. And the linkage of our material, which includes things like we have a cricket bat that was his when he was a child. We have the typewriter that he used to write his early novels. There's a lot of correspondence between Coetzee and other South African authors, which is quite nice. And which is quite interesting, there's telegrams that he was sending to his publisher of his first book. And we think J.M. Coetzee, a famous author, but of course, in the 1970s, he was a young academic whose first book had been published. So there's frantic letters saying, I went into the university bookshop and they'd never heard of my book. It's like, are they going to stock it? So we forget that even the most famous writer was once a nervous writer reading their reviews. I mean, he has scrapbooks where the reviews have been cut and carefully pasted. So there's really some interesting, plus there's that excitement of seeing. This is the handwritten draft of Disgrace. And what's quite amusing, particularly in the earlier ones, is most of it, he worked as a lecturer at UCT. Most of the early novels are written on UCT exam pads. So, you know, the notebooks that students use to write their exams. And there they are, and they're the novels written out, which is quite an exciting, it makes it interesting. And what makes things helpful for displays like this and for academic interest, one of the challenges we have in archives is people now work on their computers and they just overwrite, whereas James Coetzee will print out his draft and he will make notes on it by hand, and then he will make his corrections. So some of them you'll see, it's like draft 15, but each one of those drafts is there. You can see the changes, you can follow the thoughts, you can see when he goes off on a tangent and then comes back. So it makes it a very interesting, from a literary scholarly perspective. But we as a museum as well, we hope that the exhibition is there to make people think, wow, we've got this wonderfully interesting author, I didn't know about him, let me go read more of his books, or even just, this is really interesting. And so we were all very relieved at the end of when they left, and we were all, it's like, we hope you enjoyed. He assured us that he enjoyed the events, and so, you know, we made jokes about a 90th, but I suspect we won't be doing that. And so, yes, it was a greatly exciting project to be involved with. The director is starting to talk about, well, we need to do another big one like this, and I'm thinking, no, I don't know about that. But we probably will, so watch this space. Who knows what's coming next. Thank you, and we hope to see you at the museum.